training, the next major phase in Special Forces continuation is jungle training, where the men spend a month deep in the tropical rainforest, learning the rudiments of living and fighting in the jungle. On arrival at the camp, the men immediately appreciate the need for supreme fitness. To even stand still in the intense heat and humidity is tiring. The environment is harsh and imposing, where innumerable diseases from insect or animal bite can flourish. Initial days in the thick, dense bush can be disorientating and frightening, with incessant sounds and movements, an environment with countless hidden dangers, offering any potential enemy abundant cover and the element of surprise. The first thing the men must learn is how to construct an A-frame, which will provide them with a safe place to sleep off the jungle floor.
In some armies, they think it's hard to sleep out on the jungle floor night after night. Of course, we practice it because sometimes we might have to. But the problem is the ground is sodden, it's damp, it's crawling with insects, there's snakes, scorpions. And if you're out in it night after night getting bitten to death by these things, it's naturally going to have an effect on your operational capability. And the fact is, you're not in the jungle to prove how hard you are. You're in the jungle because you've got a job to do.
Although it's possible to live off insects and raw snakes, it's pointless doing so if something more palatable and nutritious is available. But as part of their training, the men are taught to forage and live off any nutritious things they can find, such as roots and plants. The Australian SAS are trained in exactly the same way as the UK's SAS, divided into 4 squadrons, although greater emphasis is put on jungle combat. The Australian SAS have fought in many campaigns, and during the Vietnam War mounted many daring covert missions, killing more than 500 Viet Cong guerrillas for the loss of only 1 man. The Australian regiment collectively won 4 Victoria Crosses in the Vietnam conflict. Day-to-day existence is full of discomforts. Although the mosquito repellent is strong enough to corrode plastic, it provides only partial immunity from the inevitable bites. Leeches can find their way to any part of the body. They secrete chemicals which allow them to feed without the victim's knowledge. But as soon as the leech drops off, bloated, the wound becomes inflamed and agonizingly painful.
I was in a jungle in Southeast Asia once, and a leech worked its way between my legs and latched onto quite a sensitive part of my body. When I leapt up and pulled my trousers down, I nearly went into shock to see what it was doing. And it left me with this scar, and it's about the size of a cigarette burn, which is fine, I can live with that. The thing I couldn't live with for weeks afterwards was the rest of the squadron telling me that the leech was bigger than what it was dining on.
But the real danger in the jungle is the jungle itself. Here, the basic rules for survival are imperative. The men are taken through every aspect of jungle survival. Within the dense forest, it is all too easy to become hopelessly disorientated and become lost just a few yards from the camp. The instructors instill the importance to go everywhere, even the shortest distance, in pairs. The men soon discover any physical exertion is debilitating and makes it even more difficult for the body to maintain its proper temperature. Sweat does not evaporate, stimulating the body to produce even more. Any lost bodily fluids must be steadily replaced, or dehydration and blackouts will ensue.
Once you start doing operations in the jungle, it's very easy to forget that you've got to take a lot of fluid on board to stop you dehydrating. And it happened to me once. I just collapsed, my hands started to shake, I had a cold sweat, and I couldn't even undo my belt kit. The whole patrol had to stop and get lots of fluids and electrolyte down me to get me to recover.
The basic belt kit, which includes water bottles, sterilizing tablets, map, compass and ammunition, is carried at all times. As the means for obtaining shelter and food, the galak or machete is the soldier's single most vital piece of equipment. A large part of the time is spent on practical training and exercises, the preparing of ambushes, and the rudiments of camouflage. For jungle work, camouflage cream goes over the mosquito repellent, and weapons are carried at all times, the most favored being the M16-203, proving its extreme proficiency in the jungle war of Vietnam, and has been adopted as the preferred weapon of Western special forces. The men first learn how to use explosives to clear a landing site or winch hole for a helicopter. If there is any medical emergency or a military need to get out quickly, a helicopter is the only means of getting a casualty out swiftly. On covert missions, the men are trained to operate without spoken orders, using only hand signals to communicate. 4 men are recognized as being the ideal tactical number, to maximize the chance of surprise and minimize the chance of compromise. Each patrol member will be cross-trained, so each man is a specialist in at least one of the patrol skills. A unit would usually consist of a signaller, a medic, a demolitions expert, and at least one man proficient in languages. A patrol must leave no signs which could alert the enemy to its presence. Even cobwebs must be left intact. Bodily waste must be collected. Because of the insect life it attracts, it makes a conspicuous marker. The men take it in turns to lead the patrol, helping to develop leadership qualities and an appreciation of the problems leadership brings. Nearly always, it is better to make a wrong decision and act promptly on it rather than to be indecisive.
And the best way to illustrate this is to describe a picture that's hanging on our training wing wall in Hereford. It's a pen and it's full of sheep, and underneath it says you've got to do one of 3 things: lead, follow, or get out of the way. The jungle navigation phase, more than anywhere else, is where everybody starts to get on each other's nerves. Maybe the patrol commander has taken the wrong route, and that obviously makes it a lot harder for the rest of the patrol. But that is precisely what the DS want, because they're looking to see if you've got the aptitude and the temperament to work in a harsh environment, under extreme pressure, and just with a small group. And the jungle certainly provides that environment.
Jungle navigation demands skill and experience. The maps show little more than contours and rivers. The men are taught never to use the high ground or tracks, but to cross grain and move in the thick foliage of the low ground, where the enemy and even animals will not travel, stopping only to check their position and to send out occasional navigation patrols. If the patrol commander gets it wrong, it can sometimes mean a day's distance lost. After several exhausting days in the jungle, tempers can begin to fray. When moving through jungle, a lead scout goes on ahead, weapon at the ready to check the route is safe. A camouflaged and motionless enemy will only be spotted if everyone's eyes and mind are thoroughly attuned to the environment. Combat in the harsh, dense foliage of the jungle can be daunting and exacting. Nowhere else creates the same disorientation and confusion, with the enemy often unseen. The men have meticulously practiced jungle combat. They're taught how to set and spring an ambush on an unsuspecting enemy camp. For each type of enemy encounter, they're taught specific contact drills, but the intense training and drills prepare the men for a real combat encounter. Live ammunition is nearly always used. In the regular army, this would be thought too dangerous, but in special forces, given the small numbers and quality of the trainees, the risks are considered acceptable.
It's always a dilemma. The more realistic the training, the more dangerous it is. However, training must be as realistic as possible, because firing live ammunition certainly hones the senses, and more importantly, it prepares you for the real thing. And yes, we have had people shot and killed, but we need to train to a high standard. Therefore, we think the risk is necessary.
Nowhere was the lack of jungle training more relevant than in Vietnam. The Green Berets Special Forces Group learnt the hard way. Caught in a jungle war they were ill prepared for, they adopted the skills and techniques of the Viet Cong, becoming themselves experts in jungle warfare. The valuable lessons learnt in jungle combat, patrolling and survival skills have been passed on to other special forces, leading to the exacting jungle training courses now run by all special forces units. The constant pressure on the men is deliberately unremitting. When not on exercises in the jungle, the whole day is taken up with instruction, practice, debriefing, tests, and study. And adding to the stress, the men know that throughout the 4 weeks, character and general aptitude are also being continuously assessed by their mentors.
We were tested to the extremes, both physically and mentally, because the DS wanted to see if we could make Special Air Service troopers, because it was their decision whether we'll go to the squadrons or not. And personally myself, I found it the hardest thing I've ever done. During the month of the jungle phase, I lost about 1 stone in weight. And in fact, I found it a lot harder than test week, where at least there you could put the Bergen on your back and just cover the distance. And to a certain extent, you can switch off. But here in the jungle, it was just as physical, but that you were put under immense mental pressure at the same time. They were constantly filling you with information and expecting you to take it in and then act on that information. And if they told you something once, they would expect you to remember it. The whole of the jungle phase culminates in a week-long exercise where everything that you've been taught is tested. That's patrolling, navigation, ambushes, escape and evasion, and all the survival skills that you've been taught over those last 3 weeks. At the start of selection, there was 180 of us. By the time we went to the jungle, there was 24 left. And after the jungle, we found out that only 8 of us got through. And the system that the training team used to decide if you're in or you're out is asking themselves the simple question, would you have this man in your patrol? And if the majority of them say no, well, that's it, you've binned. If the majority say yes, you've passed that phase. And they take this task very seriously because one day you might be on their patrol.